I'd like to call the September Planning Commission meeting to order. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Any changes to the agenda, Dave? I look for approval of the agenda.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Motion made and second to approve the agenda. This will go into
Call the vote.
call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Approval of the August 25th, 22 meeting minutes.
I'll make the motion to approve it.
I'll second.
Who made the motion to approve it? Don seconded it. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Your man today, huh?
Always. Like to turn that over here. Stereo. Well, good evening, everyone. Glad to be here this evening. Beautiful day. Number of things to talk about today. Big main thing is the survey. I got the results last week, Wednesday, and managed to pull together a quick analysis and summary to get out for Thursday because I didn't want this to wait. And I think it's always of interest when you do a survey as to what people are thinking out there. I did get 3 additional paper copies that were filled out from Dave early in the week. So those are not incorporated in here. The responses aren't going to change the percentages really to any degree. But what I can do is I can at least summarize the comments or pull the comments that were written on those 3, maybe send that out separate so that you can see what those additional comments were. But then I'd incorporate those into the remainder of the narrative of the survey. So we can maybe just review the summary. As noted, we had a total of about 221 responses total. We did get a surge towards the end compared to what I reported out last time. Completion rate was still a little bit low, so some of them were probably not completed entirely. But if they did 3/4 of it, that's not too bad. But overall, I think in terms of the size of the community, you know, you're right in the margin there for having some good information. I think you can make some assumptions that majority of the responses are going to reflect most of the community, but you can judge that a little bit. On the demographic end, as noted, about 80% of the respondents were 36 years of age and older. Really hard to get responses from younger people, even if they're all phone savvy and like doing that stuff. It's difficult, and we find that in many communities. Most of the respondents lived in the city for more than 20 years. Had a handful that did not live in the city, but I don't think it's enough that it really sways the pattern of responses. And surprisingly, about close to 60% did not have children. You know, I think that's been a trend as well nationwide. We're not having as many children, and you've definitely got an aging population here. So some things to consider there. Housing, as expected, most of the respondents live in traditional single-family homes. But I think as you look towards the future and what some of the desires are, it gets kind of interesting. If these numbers are even close to being accurate, you've got about, give or take, 30 to 40% of folks that probably are not living in an affordable housing unit compared to what mortgage and rent costs are compared to incomes. And we know many communities hover around that 30% area. And you've seen the headlines, obviously, all over the state about the needs for affordable housing. So I think that helps to justify some of that. Interestingly enough, while about half or a little more feel that traditional single family, you know, the same old is what they would like, there's certainly a significant number, 33%, that felt new, smaller single family homes are needed. Now, I don't know the average square footage of your homes in the community here, but I would think smaller is going to mean somewhere between perhaps, it could be as small as 800-900 square feet up to about 12 or 1,300 square feet. I mean, most of the ranch homes, for instance, done in the 70s, 80s, 90s were probably around that 1,300, 1,400 square feet. So looking at opportunities for even more small types of units, starter homes, things that people can move out of their existing homes and downsize in that nature. 36% were interested in senior living options. So your aging population would like to stay in the community is what that says to me, but they may not have enough options to do so, whether they want to live independently with assisted living or through that range. And I would say, 15% is somewhat significant, but interest in duplex apartments and even tiny homes. I did not see a lot of comments that were really anti-apartment throughout the survey results. So doesn't mean that you might not have some controversy if some things get proposed, but I think if they're designed well, they could fit well in your community. Accessory dwelling units, not a lot of high response there in terms of having ADUs, but I think still having that as an option could fit with a number of folks' lifestyles in the community, whether they're existing residents or future residents. And I think you can also think of those type of units as senior living options as well, the mother-in-law apartment type of thing. So I think there's a lot to digest there with respect to housing, and you're seeing the transition of the needs based on demographic factors and just personal preference. General growth, majority felt that you had very little new growth and development over the last number of years, but many feel it's adequate, and most folks seem to want to be in that moderate category. Don't grow too fast, don't grow too slow, do it just enough, whatever that might be. And then as expected, most respondents agreed of protecting historic and natural resources.
One question for you.
Go ahead.
It says very little or new growth or development. By that, do they mean housing?
We didn't qualify what type of development, just growth overall.
Okay.
Could be housing, could be commercial, could be industrial.
Okay.
So, yeah, just jump in if you've got some questions or want to state something here. Infrastructure, majority of respondents, 73% feel they'd like some off-street biking, hiking trails and paths. Again, I think part of that is also due to the recent pandemic and just people getting out more, enjoying themselves. And that trend is continuing. More would like additional on-street bike lanes as well as sidewalks. So again, I think it leans towards that avenue of being more mobile, having different options, getting out, getting exercise, and understanding that there probably are some place in the community where it's just not really safe to do that. So I think in the future, you're going to have to take a look, particularly with new development, how you can incorporate those features better, existing areas, integrating some of those types of facilities over time within key areas to start. Not a lot of interest in the rental bikes, the scooters and that kind of fad. So I can tell you living in Appleton, it's just one more thing you got to look out for as a driver, because those scooters are all over the place. I haven't even tried one myself yet, but there may be a time and a place in the future for that. Rankings for various types of infrastructures. I think as expected, streets are always on people's minds. They don't like the condition of the streets. They feel it needs improvement, but I'm guessing they also really don't want to pay the bills on that. It's quite expensive.
Do you feel that's normal compared to other surveys you've seen?
Yeah. We just did one for Bellevue and it was 70 to 80% was, come on, fix the roads. And
So we're not different than the rest of the state.
no. And I think that's really a function of budgets and levy limits and ability to do some of those things. So parking, most felt was adequate, about a third stating it was poor or very poor, and presuming in the downtown area mainly. And we talked about that previously, that some of that just might be more perception than reality. City's done some work to acquire some land for additional parking, but again, something to monitor. Storefronts, things are definitely improving within the downtown. I see there's another building on the north end or the corner east end getting redone, and so those are improving slowly. but obviously the public still feels there's a need to improve that. Sidewalks, lighting, seating, kind of typical responses. Public gathering spaces, I think having a third stating it's poor, 39 saying adequate, maybe leans to taking a look at what else the city can do for having some gathering spaces. I've been in New London off and on for quite a number of years, and I guess it's still hard for me to even think offhand, but where's the gathering space? Where's the center, where people go? In Appleton, Houdini Park is one of those downtown gathering spaces. So might need a little work and effort in looking at those types of spaces in the future. And then ranking some of the services out there. I think as expected, most people are concerned with police, fire, emergency services, safety, those types of things. Streets came in at 50%, utilities 27%, and Parks and Rec at 22%. And then I joked with Dave a little bit that, planning, zoning, code enforcement, building inspection were all quite low, but he did beat out the museum and the cemetery. So nowhere to go but up from there.
I'm surprised Parks and Rec got higher than snow plowing.
Yeah.
That surprises me.
Winter sports, maybe, doesn't
Oh,
matter.
There you go.
No. But certainly, the services better than I do, and where there might be some deficiencies or at least conversations in the community about improvements that are needed. So I'm interested to see if that matches, what you hear on a day-to-day basis. Certainly overwhelming support for doing crisis planning and working cooperatively with neighboring communities on those types of things. Me take a breath here. Any other comments, questions up to that point?
I'll just comment on the infrastructure. Your comment about 73% felt they wanted additional off-street biking, hiking trails, because we talked about with the Newton Blackmore Trail, and there's been some conversation whether we should be investing in that. And our open space and rec plan said the same thing. Park restrooms were number one item they wanted us to focus on. Number two is trails. And this is overwhelmingly 73% of the people say they want those off street hiking and biking paths. So that's very interesting.
You may be limited in what you can do within the area that's already developed. Maybe there's some places that you can do that, but certainly as you continue to expand, I think it's going to be utmost importance to really take a look at the design of a subdivision or other new developments and not just assume we're going to just have sidewalks and a bike lane, but pick out some of the natural features, if there's a drainage corridor or something like that, of looking at putting pathways through that. Not everything has to be right angles, in these types of development, and people want a little bit of that nature in their backyard, so to speak. So I think that's a design factor that you need to consider, maybe even strengthen some of your regulations to steer, if not require, that some of those things be considered.
And in the public gathering spaces and event programming, especially with our downtown project, we're talking about widening the sidewalks, making it more pedestrian friendly, getting those gathering areas. I mean, green spaces, that lines up exactly what we're talking about for the downtown, which is good.
So this is giving some validation of things you're already doing as well. That's good. Economic development, and we'll talk about that in more detail with the next chapter, but good 90%, most folks felt that more work and job opportunities were very important. Now, I'm not sure if they realize that there's a workforce shortage. Those two things don't match up, so you're going to have to be cautious. But the market, the businesses will really make those kinds of decisions. But the more you can do to attract people to the community, get people to stay and work in the community, the better off you're going to be from an economic perspective, and those dollars just flowing locally, obviously. And we'll touch on that in the economic development section. 57% desired more industry. So if you're going to have those work job opportunities, manufacturing, distribution, warehousing seem to be the key, and just the nature of a lot of your business here. You are a manufacturing center, no doubt. I mean, there's substantial industry here, and typically they're fairly well paying. So definitely want to continue to target that. As suspected, I believe, over half the respondents said they did 3/4 or more of their shopping outside the city. Whether it's because they work outside the city and it's just convenience that, things are there, or if they make special trips because of things you don't have in town. But I think what's interesting also is that about 84% said if you had more businesses here, they would stay shopping in town and keep things local. So whether there's any truth to that, if it happens, not sure. People kind of get in these habits and these patterns as well. But that does bode well, at least for desires of trying to do that. And again, looking ahead, 10, 20 years throughout this planning period, you're going to have the aging population. People are going to lose some of that mobility to jump down to the Fox cities, to go to Woodman's or whatever it is they do. So there may be some good reason to look at improving the business climate, the retail climate within the community to serve the community. So I'm not going to go into the listing there of business types. I know I saw Culver's mentioned more than once. Why don't you have one? But a number of specific ideas were generated in those comments. And then most felt that downtown should be really one of the places for concentrating redevelopment. You're certainly working on that as we speak, and I think it'd be a good investment to continue that in the future. Your city entrances, highway corridors were well favored for development as well, including additional lands on the edge of the city as you continue to expand. And I would think people are thinking like Highway 15, as that project gets completed and opens up some land for development, might be an opportunity. So I think there's some really good information and insights in the economic development that probably hopefully matches what you're thinking as well. Recreation, about 77% felt there were enough recreation space and facilities, which I'd argue is a little different than the public gathering spaces. That's different than off-road trails. So you might be fine on parks. Obviously, if you're going to continue to expand, or as you expand, you want to take a look and make sure you've got some park facilities nearby in new neighborhoods that are created. But I don't think you need to go gung-ho and look at monstrous facilities. So focusing more on those off-road trails and the river, obviously, that matches exactly what we talked about in the SWOT analysis early on, is the river. So putting more effort towards that over time, I think will pay dividends as well. We're in the digital age, and most folks are communicating that way. So 78% wanted or get their stuff through social media, 60% through the website, only 40% with any printed materials, and it just goes lower and lower from there. Public meetings actually beat out newspaper notices, so that's a good thing. Didn't know people even read the newspaper anymore, but you're required to publish in it, I know. Strengths and weaknesses. It's a challenge to try and summarize all of the comments that are submitted, but just kind of that gut feel, that glance of repetitive comments in there. Strengths, and again, many of these things I think match what was said in that initial SWOT analysis. Your small town community feel, friendly, caring, the accessibility, and while Fox Valley area is mentioned, obviously you've got Wapaka, Shawano, other communities that are equally as accessible. They like the healthcare access, which will be more important as you have an aging population, the resources, and the schools. It's kind of what we would expect, or hope people say about any community, but they're obviously like those things, and those are things that can help attract new residents or new businesses. And so kind of keeping an eye on those elements best you can to ensure that those things are sustained will be important. Improvements, and again, not in any priority order. Road maintenance mentioned numerous times. Affordable housing needs numerous times again, and even some detailed suggestions in there. Many people want another grocery store. I think there was one comment, if I'm right, that mentioned Shawano has 3 grocery stores and you only have 1. And not sure exactly how you attract another grocery store, but they've got their logic and their methodologies for where they decide to site, and adding population is certainly going to be a critical part of that. David just told me that the Swiderski development may be expanded now to 98 units, and that's going to put a lot of people in the downtown area. And if you get more developments like that, you'll have that critical mass where maybe you can attract an additional grocery store, or perhaps the Highway 15 area. I could see something perhaps going out more on the south and the southeast edge that's easily accessible by those that are commuting or even passing by going up north instead of coming all the way into town to grab something. So definitely from a business standpoint, that's a desire, and always more retail and restaurants. There's an enormous list that's been given in the comments. Downtown revitalization, code enforcement is important, so keep that in mind, Dave, and more sidewalks, trails. But that last open-ended question, again, a lot of those repeated some of the things that were written down earlier, but grocery store, retail, comment about the need for vision and leadership. And I'm not going to be one to stand here and say you have that or you don't have that. I think you know it if you have it. But many people in every community really like to see that visionary thinking and that leadership and getting things done and transformative change in many cases. So I think you're on the right path for what you guys have been doing and thinking and putting your efforts towards. And that to me says you should continue doing that in a sensible manner. But downtown, river, parks, trails, traffic, you know, a lot of the things we would expect to say. But again, I think, you know, if we go back, take a look at the flavor of the comments and the results, they match up pretty well with the things that were generated just by this group early on in that process. So I think you'll have some level of comfort as we move forward, continue to build on these recommendations and ultimately the final plan that is going to incorporate perhaps some of these types of things. So what other thoughts do any of you have? Is there any surprises in there? Things that you didn't expect?
I think most of that is what we answer to every day.
Mhm.
Like you said, a lot of the SWAT stuff that we've done was on them boards.
Yep. Certainly no shortage of individual comments. I always appreciate when people take the time to write things down. But I would certainly suggest, you know, kind of taking a look at every single comment there and, you know, kind of assessing, you know, what that means, how that fits into what we're doing, how it fits into city efforts that are going right now or in the future. You know, this could be a very valuable document, I think, to help justify things that you're doing when you do get questioned. And if someone said, well, I didn't take that survey, then you tell them they missed their chance, you know, snooze, you lose.
This just helps us in any strategic planning or budgeting, especially budgeting process to justify, you know, why are we spending money on a trail? Why are we spending money on police protection or
Yep.
Parks and Rec? We're not going to tell our Parks and Rec director that they scored higher to our Public Works director over snow plowing. We're not going to say that. So,
Yeah.
But still.
That's relative importance, obviously. But no, I think, you know, keeping this handy, taking a look at it once in a while, having it at budget meetings. You know, I would recommend certainly making sure that your council gets this report, if not all of your committees. So do feel free to share it. Or maybe after I make a few edits, I found a couple little just spelling error kind of things, and I'll add the other comments. So maybe sending that final version out would be good.
Thought the clothing and shoes number, that was the highest number over groceries and restaurants and other stuff, 92% clothing and shoes. So I guess Dave, as economic development focus, that's something we need to kind of talk about.
Any other thoughts? Okay. Well, certainly hope this was helpful. I mean, it's helpful to us as planners trying to digest what's going on in a community and what people are thinking. If you've got any other questions or thoughts on that down the road, certainly let me know, or through Chad or Dave, they can relay that to me. So, but appreciate everyone's effort in getting the survey out and the utility for putting the notice in the bills to spread it far and wide. Only so much you can do to get people to answer, but those that do will drive the community.
Did you say what percentage of the population this was that responded?
I did not, because I meant to go back actually and do that, but then I realized I should also make sure I've got the right number for exactly how many were mailed out through the utility, because that percentage and number is going to be different than the population.
Sure.
So, but thanks for bringing that up, and I'll add that into the narrative.
Because you were hoping for what, 18%?
Usually 10 to 15 is nice.
Okay.
But and rarely do we see it get much higher than that.
As bad as voting.
All right, if we're done with that, we'll move on to the economic development chapter. Now, I'll tell you, even though we started using the old plan that was done under that Wapaka County cluster model, this was one of the more difficult ones to piece together, because there just wasn't a lot in there that was specific to New London. So we kind of had to do this one almost from scratch. But again, I think it provides some worthwhile information and perspective. I'm not going to go into detail on everything. I'll hit some of the high points here. Obviously, we traditionally take a look at a number of different kinds of statistics just to kind of gauge where the community's at. Educational attainment, you're right up there with most communities, a fairly educated population and workforce. Most folks are in the workforce, and those that are coming through should be ready to come into the workforce. So probably no serious concerns there. Employment status, again, we're using ACS data between 2016 and 2020. The newest 2020 census data, that snapshot for that single year, is still not available and won't be available until early next year. If we happen to get our hands on some of that before the plan is adopted, we may be able to quickly just put a few sheets together and append it onto the plan. We're not going to rewrite everything because of that. But, you know, when we're talking employment status, obviously some things happened after 2020 with the pandemic and everything else, the increase in the workforce shortage and the like. So, but overall, unemployment's pretty low everywhere. So there's no concern. In fact, it's the opposite in terms of a workforce shortage. Also, remember too, that we've got the work from home phenomena that's occurred. And I just read a report that stated at its peak nationally, there were about 70% of employees that worked from home at one time. That has decreased now to about 30%. But what I read is they expect that to remain at about that 30% level. And whether that's 30% of people are actually working from home full time, or people are working 30% of the time at home, wasn't quite clear, but you could probably think of it either way. But again, you know, some communities out there across the country are really taking that as a marketing cue and marketing themselves, saying, hey, come live where it's less expensive. Get out of California or New York, move to New London. You can work from home. We've got internet, and cost of living is reduced. So think about it that way as a marketing tool, perhaps. Move on to employment by industry. And I think, as expected, as we know, manufacturing is the key industry within the city of New London. Education and entertainment are next. And, you know, we find that to be typical of some of the medium-sized communities within the region. It shakes out. Of course, Wisconsin itself is very industrially based. So in terms of employment, so we follow quite well along the patterns of the region, of the state, et cetera. And I don't foresee that changing a great deal. Employment by occupation kind of validates that a bit. For production, transportation, material moving occupations is the largest, with some management, business, and arts occupations being next at about 820 employees. what I find interesting now is looking at some of the place of employment and the commuting patterns. And historically, we've had commuting data out of the census, as you see in table 6.5 there, which tells you the mode by travel of what people do in terms of getting to work. Obviously, many people drive and drive alone, and that's still typical in about a 23-minute travel time to work. So most folks, a good chunk of folks are working locally. Some are working outside the community, but the drive times aren't terrible. My guess is those that are leaving the community are probably going to jobs in the Fox cities that are much closer to the northwest part of it, and things in Greenville or Grand Chute in that area. You may have some that go down to Oshkosh or Kaukauna, something like that. But my guess is that majority of those leaving are probably within that northwest corner. There are some new tools out there, and there's a tool the census developed called On the Map, which I always find interesting. And typically I'll use this before I even go out to any community that I'm not familiar with or even work with, because I think it tells a lot. In the city's case here, you basically have an equal number of people leaving the community for work and an equal number of people coming into the community for work, and only about 700 or so that live and work here. And there's a lot of communities that are that way. But if you think about it, how do you capture those 3,159 people that are leaving the community every day and get them to take jobs or have the right jobs here to get them to stay here and live and work? And how do you get those that are coming in for the jobs to live here and expand your community's population and workforce? That's really the challenge as I see it. So there's definitely some work to do there, but this pattern isn't atypical of many of the communities in the area. And then there's some additional detailed data in figure 6.2 that shows you where workers live, workers within the city, where they live and where they're coming from, and folks in the city and where they are employed. So these match up with some of the numbers previously within 726 living within the city and 726 working within the city at the same time. But again, most folks are traveling to Appleton area, the metro area, Oshkosh, Wapaka, Neenah. It's wide variety. They kind of go all directions. I'm always surprised at those that travel to Milwaukee, and I can't see that being done on a daily basis necessarily, particularly now. Maybe a lot of that still work from home, but technically the business is located in Milwaukee. When you see a city like Fond du Lac that's much closer and has an interstate, it makes some sense. People are willing to make those commutes sometimes. But I think, examining this information a little more, trying to take stock of it and figure out how you address some of those challenges of getting more people to work within the city, or the ones coming in to work to live here is going to be one of your biggest challenges. Any questions, comments up to that point? Anything surprising?
Back to that last graph there. Did you say that was typical or non-typical?
It's fairly typical. That and it varies a little bit, maybe by 10 or 20% one way or the other. But end up finding that there's only about 10 to 15% of people living and working in community, which initially you kind of think, wow, that's pretty low. But again, you see how many workers are coming in and getting people coming in, obviously from rural areas, from some of the smaller communities and such is where that's likely coming from.
I have a question about those numbers as well. The 726, is that the number of people that live in New London proper and work in New London proper?
Yes.
Okay. So the number of people coming into the community might still have a New London address, but they are outside this proper
Correct.
limits.
Correct.
Okay.
As far as I understand the data sets, yeah.
Okay.
So it's not based on zip code. So.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. can move on. Discussion of what's available in terms of business and industrial development. Tried to summarize best I could some of the areas that are currently active downtown, obviously, and there's been a lot of work in the downtown as we've discussed. You're doing some improvements with facade building program. Wanted to acknowledge the street reconstruction projects because that's certainly important in terms of design and function and feel. And then I caught a little piece, I think somewhere on your website there about the murals, and thought that's a good thing to include too, because the arts are very important in terms of growing communities and revitalization. And I'd say regardless of a community size, we're seeing a lot more communities really embrace the arts as not only an attractant to bring residents in, but visitors as well. There's been a plethora of, newer festivals and other arts types of projects and things going on all over the region. And you're no different. And so I'm glad to see that those things are going on here. Do scream out if there's something that is incorrect in any of this stuff as well, or if you want something added that's not discussed, make sure I know. Then we've got a discussion of the corridors that you have. North Shawano Street, obviously one of the main commercial areas. A fair amount of comments, I think, in the survey going back to that regarding that corridor and some desires for specific types of businesses and other things. But there's room for some additional development there, and maybe could even argue over time, over that 20-year planning period, some redevelopment may be warranted or required. It's always amazing to me how disposable buildings are nowadays. You think something gets built, significant investment, and it's going to be there forever. But next day it changes use and someone tears it down. I know I'm working in town of Buchanan, and a bank building that was built probably less than 10 years ago is now defunct. It's being torn down for a car wash and an oil change place. Like, it seems wasteful to me, but the market is the market. So your Mill Street corridor, Business 45 and County T, again, that's a bit of an older commercial corridor there. Certainly has a lot of significance and life to it, but probably one of the areas that could have some redevelopment and a new focus. I think, as an entrance to the city, there certainly could be some enhancements in conjunction with the 15 project and increased opportunities out there and potentially even more traffic. That should certainly be an area that you might want to focus on soon, if not next, if you're not already, as redevelopment. I mean, the accessibility to that area is just as equal, I think, if not better than what you have on the north side here.
Just as a start, Mill and then Beckert Road, that corner, we do have that tied into our TID district over there.
Yeah.
So there are some highway commercial properties that are in the TID that just along those same lines. So there is a start there, but we can continue.
True. And the good news, you don't have a lot to worry about with environmentally contaminated sites. I believe there's only 3 open sites within the community, while historically there were a number of sites with contamination. Many of them have either been cleaned up or dealt with to a degree where they just basically need some monitoring and things of that nature. So not a huge impact there. And again, compared to many communities that I've worked with, that's a pretty short list. There's still a lot of communities, even smaller ones than you, that have more problems with those types of sites than New London does. Quick summary of the business and industrial parks. The one thing I was lacking was any kind of good map or description of where the boundaries of these parks are. So Chad, maybe I can work with you or Dave. I don't know if you've got separate maps or we can sketch something out, but that's also one of the reasons we don't have the map completed in here. So we'll work with staff to define those, get those on the map, and obviously that map can be a nice little marketing piece if you've got interested customers and businesses that are interested in coming in town. You can easily show them where the industrial areas are, where the TIF districts are, and use that to market and promote. we'll try and get a better handle on, how many acres of land are available within each of those areas as well.
Am I missing the Northeast Business Park? You said you got 4 business parks here. You need that as well?
Down a little farther.
Is it down? Did I miss it? There it is.
Yeah.
Okay, yep,
Scared me a second.
Nope.
I didn't think I missed it.
it's right here. Nothing there.
And things seem to go fairly well in the Northeast Business Park. You've been getting reasonable amounts of development and interest over time.
Been inquiries, but I think just with the construction costs for a while, that kind of slowed down. So hopefully,
Hmm.
hopefully things kind of pick up. There's been inquiries, so that's a good thing.
What year was that created? That park? Recall?
Before my time here. I started in 2007 and it was going before that, so
Okay.
I'd have to look that up.
We could get everybody to grab a
2000s.
shovel that's interested. We'd be in business.
Mhm.
Good way to put it. So, quick summary of the existing tax and increment finance districts. If I'm correct, there's 3 that exist. You had a couple prior to that, but those have been closed.
Mhm.
And it looks like those are all being fairly successful. I did have the project plans for the first 2, but I didn't have the one handy for the TID 6. I just had the map. So maybe if you'd be able to send me and I'll send you a reminder, if I get the project plan, I'll finish off some things in there, expand on that one a little bit. I know that's your newest one. So. And then just a reminder as well, and you're gonna, because of the age of these districts, it's a long way off unless they're that successful that you're gonna get them paid off fairly quickly. But do remember, there is now a provision in the state law that allows any TIF district to be extended for 1 additional year at the end, and that entire increment that's generated can be put towards affordable housing, whether it's in the district or outside of the district, anywhere in the community. So that can, depending on the district, can be a significant chunk of change that can be used to improve infrastructure, to facilitate affordable housing, to provide, we call it subsidies, incentives, other things to help create that affordable housing. So it's very important you keep that in mind. I know of a few communities that really missed the boat and forgot all about that or weren't aware, and they closed their district, and that's it.
Is there a sunset on that? I mean, the 3 TIDs we got open right now are fairly new, so they're gonna be 20 years yet, so
Yeah.
I don't know.
No sunset provision put in the law that I know of, but 20 years from now, who knows what the legislature is going to do? I mean, they easily just pull things away as easily as they put them in. But I think as long as we continue to have a housing shortage and the related workforce shortage kind of combination, that you're going to see that provision stay in there. I'm not convinced those issues are going to be completely solved in 10 or 20 years either. So there may be more things that come into play actually through the legislature to help with some of the affordable housing. I'm working right now with Thrive, which is one of the regional economic development entities like New North in more southern part of the state, just a 2-county area, Jefferson and Dodge County. And we worked with them as well as WEDC and a few other partners and got a what was it, about $100,000 grant from WEDC as a pilot project. It's not through a formal program. It's a new idea, which basically allowed Thrive to hire Cedar as well as some other contractors to work with some of the small communities in Dodge and Jefferson County on implementation issues related to affordable housing. They didn't want to pay for housing studies or help pay to define the need for affordable housing. They feel that's more of a community issue. You guys should be gauging that yourself, but they were very interested in how do you kickstart the development? What's needed to do that? And so if we're successful in achieving some of the objectives from that grant, it's likely that WEDC will come up with some additional programs that will allow communities to help on that implementation. And we're finding marketing, well, land availability, number one, is a challenge in some communities. You know, the farmers, 2 farmers own everything around a small village, and if they're not going to sell, they're not going to sell. So, redevelopment options may be more attractive. So how do you kickstart redevelopment in those communities? Those that do have some properties available, marketing seems to be the issue. Yeah, it's up for sale by a realtor, but the realtors aren't doing anything or not much to push the property. And so looking at other methods to market those opportunities to developers and builders is really some of the things that we're focused on right now. So I'll keep that in mind as we continue to work with New London, and there may be some new things that come out of that few years down the road. So it's good to know the state is interested in trying to help solve a problem instead of creating one. Short listing here of some programs and support entities. I think, as you know, economic development doesn't occur in a vacuum. It's more than just the city. It's a combination of entities and folks that do things related to economic development. Ideally, there's good collaboration. And I think over my decades of working in the planning field, I've always seen a lot more of that collaboration, coordination just under that kind of economic development silo. And so I think that's a natural. I think New London is pretty engaged in a lot of things going on around you and beyond your boundaries with Wapaka County, with the Regional Planning Commission, New North, and those types of things. And so I think it's important that you stay connected with those groups and keep hearing the conversations, getting involved in some of these projects that may be solutions, and hopefully reap the benefits from some of those types of activities. The desired business and industries. This, I think, was actually part of what was in the old plan at the time. And I thought it'd be good to at least leave it in here to not only check with you as the Plan Commission to see if it's statements that you agree with. And I think after taking a look at the survey as well, a number of these things really match up quite well. I don't think they're statements that are too far out of line for where the city is now and where it wants to be. Certainly, if folks have other thoughts, we can make edits to those. Most of them are pretty common sense. Might be a good checklist to have in front of you when you review proposals. Who knows?
Mhm.
Cited a bit of a repeat on section 6.6 of things coming out of the SWOT analysis would be appropriate here as well. I can now start adding a little bit of commentary. Didn't have time, obviously, with the survey completion date, but I can add a little more commentary to each of the plan elements regarding survey results and how those match up. But again, I think we already know that many of the things discussed or noted matched up quite well with what was conducted at the SWOT analysis. And from there, we get into the meat of it, the goals and objectives. And again, this was basically pulled out of the existing plan and gave it a review. Forgot to note it in the header at the beginning there, apologize. But I didn't see a need for a lot of change. I think the statements that are in there are very good. I did add a few little things that are in bold italics, just as I was kind of thinking about these things. Affordable housing is now an economic development item on everyone's list. 10 years ago, it was not. So I think it's important to acknowledge that is part of the strategy, or should be part of the strategy for the city, is to focus on that affordable housing, which will allow you to keep residents and keep workers, as well as perhaps attract more. Wanted to make sure New North acknowledged in that third objective on the first one. But again, I don't think I need to read through each and every one of these things. I think overall, the base goals and objectives are pretty common sense. They're pretty timely and appropriate, even though many of them were developed a good 10 some years ago. I think conditions haven't changed that greatly, other than maybe the affordable housing and the workforce shortage, but the desires for what you want the community to be, I think, are relatively the same. Comments or thoughts just on the goals and objectives? Go to the next page. I made an addition on goal 4 to again acknowledge the affordable workforce housing creation as perhaps an area of focus. That just seemed to be omitted there. Other things seem to make a lot of sense. Thoughts on those goals and objectives? You're comfortable with them at this point? Anything else you think is missing from that? Then the policies and recommendations. Again, I think the majority of what was in the current plan is still relative and important to the community, and didn't see a whole lot of need to change those based on at least what I'm familiar with and what I know. Did look at some of the policies under the city directive, ED5, making sure we acknowledge the 45 and the 15 corridor and the opportunities that are going to present itself there. ED6, adding some of the additional entities in terms of coordination and providing resources. But I think the rest under the city directive part is still pretty relative and true. Did look at, again, trying to reinforce the affordable housing aspect by adding number 10 on there. Have any conversations occurred with your major employers in terms of, obviously they've got workforce needs, but have they given any indication as to, are those workforce needs tied to lack of housing?
They are. April Kapitsky, our chamber director, and I have met just in the last 6 months. Tyson, Amcor, Pallet One. We have meetings coming up with electric up in Business Park. Northland Electric, and then they make the fire trucks up there.
Seagrave?
Yep, or not Seagrave.
Four-wheel drive.
No, in the industrial park. Put me on the spot, but we've got meetings with that. And yes, the employment is a challenge. Transportation and housing does come up in those conversations.
Okay.
I'm not gonna say which one's higher than the other, but those are two that do come up.
I am
EJ
aware.
Metals. EJ Metals was it on the top. So,
I spoke with the director at Wapaka County EDC the other week, and he informed me they had just gotten a state grant, a large state workforce grant to develop a more of a mobility program throughout the county. So I'm sure if you're not aware of it, you will be, and they'll be putting details together. But yeah, that transportation is a challenge for many people.
I just had a meeting with the city administrators in Wapaka County and Jeff from Wapaka County Economic Development Corporation. I think it was Aaron from Wapaka brought up that came across an article or some type of effort that down in Sheboygan, there's something that the Economic Development Corporation down there worked with private businesses, and some of the major industries, they've raised millions of dollars all of a sudden to push into new affordable housing efforts from the private sector. So that was very
Yeah.
interesting to see.
No, and I was going to make mention of that as well, that seems to be a trend. I almost equate it to, we're going back to the old company towns, like Pullman and or Chicago and stuff, where the company used to build the housing for its employees, and those days left a long time ago, but now we're kind of circling back to that. In fact, I just drove down Highway 33 coming east to 41 by Quad Graphics and noticed that Quad Graphics built a subdivision near the factory. Just based on the name of it, I have to assume they're connected, but most likely for its workers. City of Green Bay, I know, had a couple of companies offer and donate land and money and just said, here, get us some housing. They don't have the time to mess with that. So I think it's a real possibility, and having those conversations would be good. If you can get businesses to invest in that, you're going to be better off for it. And if you'd like, and if you think it's helpful, we can look at putting specific strategy on that in here.
I was
I
wondering,
think that's definitely something that you brought up transportation as well. I mean, getting that transportation involved with that aspect, hand in hand with our housing as well.
And with that County Economic Development Corporation, they got that big grant from the state not too long ago, so that's gonna be coming forth as well.
So,
3.2 million.
I forget the number, but millions of dollars that they received on that.
yeah. I know some of that started probably a good close to 10 years ago. There were a couple of companies in Neenah and public transit wasn't available where the factories were. And so they just started, I think initially they just hired through Valley Transit and contracted for some special bus service for their employees. So definitely not out of line this day and age. All right, development review criteria. Again, really didn't look at any modifications. I think what was in the current plan is still relative and fits the community's thoughts here, unless you say otherwise.
Could you explain what a large bulky box-like commercial structure is?
My guess would be that's referring to things like a Walmart.
Should be avoided?
Why the statement was put in there back then, I don't know. But there's mixed feelings about those kind of large, big box stores. Not only aesthetically, but sometimes transportation and traffic congestion and things of that nature. But certainly if you feel that that statement's too strong, we can modify or pull it out, have some
That
discussion.
doesn't really align with the grocery store aspect.
Kind of out of alignment with what we're hearing they want in the community.
Yeah, well, even with grocery stores, particularly if you look in more urban areas, Milwaukee and such, they put in large grocery stores, but they don't look anything like what you have here, you see in other places, or like a Woodman's or something like that. They can blend in a little better into a community.
So you're talking more or
So-
less blending in, not necessarily what they are, like a Woodman's is a box store,
Yeah,
you know, or a Super Walmart is a box store, and that's what we get asked for a lot. So you're more or less talking about blending into the community.
I'm guessing that,
Appearance of the
yeah,
facility.
that's my guess is where that statement originally came from. It probably dealt more with aesthetics and such, you know, that there's other people have issues with Walmarts too. The Walmart in Bellevue, it came up in the survey many times that people would rather not even have it there because of the types of people it attracts, the crime and everything else. You know, good things come with bad things sometimes. And how true that is, I don't know. Maybe it's perception, but that perception
think
can be
there's other
out there.
ways you can control that. I mean, without having to say that kind of a statement. I think that statement,
Shall be avoided.
you know,
yeah.
or, I mean, I think other ways of us looking at site plans and looking at all that kind of stuff is a better way than, I just think this sounds very restrictive.
Short-sighted.
You know,
I
that
agree.
we don't want development. And I mean, I'm looking at our survey and we do, you know, or at least our citizens do. And so I would suggest that we take that out. I mean, I think there's other ways that we can control.
I agree with you.
Yeah. Let me see if I can play around with that statement, but really have it lean more towards, you know, any type of large commercial structure should be designed to blend in, you know, design standards and control those aspects because you can. Many corporations over the decades have conceded that, you know, we want to be in a certain location and we'll meet any requirements a community has. You know, Target's been doing small urban stores. Downtown Minneapolis has a Target in it that, you know, obviously you see the big red Target symbol, but other than that, it doesn't look any different than the big buildings in a downtown anyway. McDonald's have complied. 20 years ago, I did some design standards for the village of Kimberly that had an area that Walgreens wanted to come into, but nobody really wanted it because the way it looked and the traffic and everything else. We did design standards. Walgreens came back and said, yeah, we'll spend the extra $1 million to meet that. And then they went away and actually went across the river to Little Chute And then the village of Kimberly, for some reason, allowed one of these video stores to come in there that didn't adhere to the design standards at all. So, but I think design is the issue there, and we'll modify
I just
that.
think it sounds, it
Reword it
makes us,
maybe.
it limits us, and I don't think we want that. I think we want as much, if anything wants to come in.
I agree with you. We already battled that concept that we've eliminated situations. I'll bring it up like the Super Walmart, which hasn't been the case, but to put a statement in there like that, it's going to solidify a lot more.
Well, and anytime you say shall be, that's like
Yeah.
solid,
No, I think, good point, and appreciate you bringing that up. I mean, if any corporate entity was looking at the comp plan to see what your community is all about and saw that, then yeah, they might think otherwise. But
Yeah.
if they see that, well, we'd be welcome there, but we might have to jump through a few hoops, they're willing to do that. All right, recommendations, again, majority, I think, of what was in there is still relative. We made a little bit of additions, again, recognizing the affordable housing issue there. And we can certainly add something more as a recommendation, more specific to working with businesses on some of the employment and housing issues we talked about. Any other thoughts that you might have?
When you say affordable housing, what is that? Is that like market rate or is that low income?
No, affordable housing, that term, it changes. People still take some offense to affordable housing because they think it means low income and Section 8 apartments and those types of things. When reality, affordable housing is that definition that you're not paying more than 30% of your income on housing costs, whether that's your mortgage and rent, utilities, insurance, all those things combined. If you haven't done the math for yourselves, do it once and see where you fit in. But it doesn't take much nowadays to get up to that 30%. So when we talk about affordable housing and sometimes we'll use the term workforce housing to really make people realize we're not talking about low income. We're talking about teachers. We're talking about nurses, police and firemen, people that are good people, good working people, just can't afford to live in places anymore. And that's the challenge. So expect as you dive into those issues, you may get some backlash. You might get some folks that are a little freaked out by this, and you need to take the time to explain to them that we're talking about people just like them.
Yeah, I just,
just
if I do get a question,
Yeah.
questions about how many times we have said affordable housing in here.
Yeah.
Just so I could explain to them what it means.
And affordable is relative to your income, obviously. What's affordable to someone making 45 grand a year is different than someone making 300 grand a year. So keep that in mind too. And I don't mean to minimize the need that's out there for low income housing either. There's increasing needs for low income housing, until we start seeing wages going up more than they even are now. That's still going to be a challenge out there. So expect that there will be some need for low income housing. But again, I think trying to disperse that type of housing more and not concentrate it in one area is recommended, because you get less of the real or perceived problems associated with that. I mean, you're not going to have a Cabrini Green here or anything like that, but those are definitely challenges. But I think the world is getting a little better at recognizing that there's a variety of needs out there and situations. So
It's supply and demand too. I mean, if we could get more apartments here, then the rent prices would actually go down and make them affordable.
possible
When
as
you don't
well.
have anywhere to rent, they can charge pretty much whatever they want.
Yep. Bigger cities have been having challenges with that and trying to do more rent control and those types of things, and you're nowhere near that, but yeah, it's amazing how much has changed. I'm glad I'm not young enough to be a first-time home buyer looking for a starter home. I'm glad I got my house 20 years ago for what I did. And now you look at the market, I'm thinking, boy, I could sell my house for a pretty penny now, but where would I go? What am I gonna find that's affordable?
And
So-
Quad Graphics did build a dormitory.
Yep.
Quad Graphics did build a dormitory by
Okay.
their place for seasonal work employees.
Yeah. Yeah, we're in a little different world than we were 10 years ago in economic development, and a lot of communities are starting to take this stuff to heart and putting a lot of effort to it. And again, I think that it's going to be an area that your city is going to need to focus on. I mean, it's a critical part of the community's existence, if you will. If you don't have good workforce, good housing for them, you're not going to have all the rest of the stuff that goes with it. So, and less money to invest in those nice things. So,
On the last statement you got on there, explore and promote opportunities for tourism. I just want to kind of ask the group if you feel like that, as I was reading through this, an economic development platform, just with promoting those special events in the community, the Irish Fest, the youth baseball, youth softball programming, Fall Fest and things like that. Those special events obviously make an impact on our economic situation in the town. Do we want to strengthen that statement a little bit more, that we're going to support those groups that bring those events to community? Or do you feel like that statement's strong enough?
Isn't there a tourism board?
There's a tourism board, yep.
I
And
mean,
there's a
can-
tourism commission. And they specifically, they get their money through the room tax, and then they provide grants for marketing. They've got a policy for
Maybe
things.
to
but-
include that in there, the tourism board or that we.
But that's a tourism commission,
Oh,
separate.
tourism.
So I mean, city as general,
Okay,
do you feel like that statement's strong enough to help our nonprofits and our other groups in town, or do you guys want to strengthen that one a little bit more? Because those groups make a big impact for our
Mhm.
community.
Sorry.
I think it can be enhanced. I mean, to include some of our nonprofit organizations and
yeah, I forgot or didn't realize they had a tourism commission, so I can put that on the list sort of in the inventory part here. But I'm wondering if maybe changing it to say something to the effect of explore, promote, and support opportunities for tourism as a strategy to attract residents and business. Something to that effect.
Mhm.
Okay. That way it connects a little more to some of the other issues there, because tourism can play a role in that, obviously.
And those
Times if
kind
you
of-
played tourist and they go, boy, I could see living here,
Yeah.
while you're on vacation. So,
And that was the Wapaka County Economic Development Corporation, their marketing plan. Their goals were to first market the county on a tourism aspect, try to get those people to visit the county.
Yep.
And then once they're here, show why this would be a great community to live. So
yeah.
along the same lines.
And to some degree, that's New North strategy for the whole region
Yep.
is to show that we're unique and special and they make efforts to bring in graduating students to show them the businesses and industry and, not here as tourists, but to trying to attract talent. And tourism can be part of that if you've got the facilities and the amenities and the resources to do that. I got to keep reminding myself too, and millennials are getting older, so I guess it's Gen Z, but everyone thought of millennials as wanting to be in the cities where the action is and the entertainment and the bars and all of that kind of stuff. But even back then I forgot, some of them like the country too, and fishing and hunting and stuff like that. And certainly got that in abundance in this area. So there's no harm in targeting young people to live in an environment like this. They don't all want to live in the big city.
We've got the best of both worlds,
I think
We
in a
can
way you
have our
do.
small town, but we're within driving distance of the world.
Yep. In fact, I remember 5-10 years ago, UW Extension did a study trying to figure out what attracted millennials. And I think the answers are a bit surprising, but they kind of narrowed it down to as long as your community that it's like within X distance, like 10, 20 miles of an interstate, and easy access to entertainment, being close to a larger city. So New London would probably fit that perfectly. You're maybe a little far removed from the interstate, but you got major highway. So they're looking for accessibility. You know, they're looking for some of the action in a downtown like this, and that could suffice, but they still want to be a little more out in the country and have access to those kind of rural amenities too. But yeah, play the cards you have. I think that's the lesson here. It's not all woe is me. You've got a lot going for you in your community. Challenge is finding the money to maintain and improve it. That's all. All right, if there's nothing else, we can end this. The next meeting, I believe if I'm correct, I didn't bring my notes, but I believe there's only 2 elements left to address, and one will be housing. So we'll get into the nitty gritty more on housing and some of the statistics, and that'll tie into what we just talked about. And I think some of the basic issues and opportunities, just meaning the population and demographics information. We were hopeful that by this time, late in the year, we'd have the census data, but again, it's not going to be available in 2023. So we'll work with the ACS information, which will still be good. But I think intuitively, we kind of know what's going on out there as well in those areas. But then we can use that information to do compare and contrast against some of the facilities and other things that may be impacted by growth, and discuss some of those types of things. And from there, I think we're going down the path of trying to pull everything together. We're going to have to look at that land use element again that we did earlier, and maybe just see if we need to rethink anything on that, rethink anything on the map based on the conversations and the new information here. We should be wrapped up. Simple as that.
Just one correction, page 13. It says there's a 4-person economic development committee. We have a 7-person plus 2 student member economic development committee.
2 students.
Nice catch.
How do you manage that? I don't think I've ever seen an economic development committee have students on it.
2 students. Parks and Rec has one student.
Yeah.
So just to try to tie the school in, get their feedback, and
In the next generation.
Good work. So. Yeah, don't know what those young kids are thinking unless you ask them. They usually won't tell you.
We've had some good.
I know I'm
good
getting old now
support.
when I start talking about that younger generation.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Very good. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of the evening. I'll let you have the fun talking about fee schedules,
Oh, boy.
and we'll see you next month.
Okay, thank you.
So enjoy the rest of what's left of summer here.
Mhm.
See you in fall.
Have a good one. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you.
The next one's yours, huh, Dave? You schedule.
You know, you have one.
Yeah.
You give you this. Yep. Sure. Hard copy here.
Yes, please.
Yeah, man.
Thank you.
preface this. I've been looking over the fee schedule for the last couple months. I had quite a few cities send me their fee schedules or looked them up online. I also had met with Kunkel Engineering, who we contract with for some of our zoning and building inspection stuff. After talking with them, they seemed to think the city of Berlin had recently done their fee schedule. And they kind of liked the way it worked and how their fees were set up. Although ours isn't formatted like theirs. We kind of use that because they were kind of in the middle of the road on their fees. There was some a lot higher, some a lot lower. And like I said, after talking with Kunkel and having several meetings with them, we seem to think Berlin was kind of middle, like I said, middle of the road. And how they computed their fees is a little easier than some of the methods that we were using. So we're probably just going to have folks look these over. Maybe you can kind of go line by line. The stuff in red is stuff that is changing from what we currently have. And then a lot of the ones at the bottom of the page where there isn't a comparison is services that our department provides that we currently aren't charging for. So there's a lot of zoning that we do from day to day. And it's a very large part of my time dealing with zoning issues. So we want to kind of address some of that stuff. And that kind of reflects in the fees there. So it's not a complete list, but it's, like I said, I've worked on this probably now for a couple months. So it's pretty close to where I think I'd like to see it. So we're looking for some direction from the planning commission to maybe look at these after some tweaks and maybe adding this as an appendix to our current or to the new zoning ordinance that we do. Right now, a lot of the zoning fees are kind of mixed throughout the language in the zoning ordinance itself. We want to pull all those fees out of there and have a specific appendix that we can modify as time goes by without having to do an ordinance amendment to make changes to that. So if we see needs arise, we can address those without having to do a zoning ordinance amendment. We can just change the fee schedule and there'll be language in there saying that would be an option for us.
What does it when you say we're on a lot of there, where it says $30 plus, is that plus zoning?
Plus the zoning fee. So some of these, it'll have the fee for the particular thing that they're doing, but it'll also have a zoning component to it where I've got to do zoning and like say plan review on something. So like I said, a significant amount of my time is dealing with zoning stuff. And we really weren't capturing that from the public, So ideally, we'd like the department to be more self-funded than it is now. The city puts a lot of money in for running that department, and a lot of building departments in most states, they're more of an enterprise fund where they're pretty much self-funded, or at least a lot closer than we are to it.
Mhm.
So at some point, we'd like to maybe even talk about hiring another person to kind of split up some of the duties, and this would go a long way toward paying for not only my position and the benefits that come with it, but also another additional person to kind of help out. So most other municipalities have a zoning person and a building person. We're here, we're kind of stretching our resources a little bit to accommodate the public on that stuff. So
Wapaka's got separate zoning, building inspector, Little Shoot. So there are communities that, like Dave said, that's,
One of the few that have only one.
for our size of community. Yep. So we've got to do some more research on how we want to, set up that, how that's going to work. But in general, we got to be a little bit more self-funded. And we've provided the Berlin, like you said, we provided the Wapaka building schedule. That's on the next couple pages after Berlin to kind of give you some homework to kind of just look at it and see how you guys feel about some of these fees. Now, Dave, I mean, one of the things I caught in, like for Wapaka, they charge per value for a lot of things, I
Yeah,
believe.
I do know that, I think you told me that Wapaka, it was amazing how much money they had brought in through their permitting
Yep.
process, and they're not much, if any, bigger than we are. I
We're
think
bigger.
maybe- Yeah.
Yep.
So, I think the fee schedule that we had in there, I mean, we had items in there for $2.
Mhm.
You know, obviously, takes quite a bit of money to run that department, and we weren't close to capturing the kind of money that we were putting out, so.
But one of the points I was coming up with, like for Wapaka, they charge more on the value of the construction on some things, whereas, and it's not, everybody's not doing one way or the other. Some are doing the value, some are doing the
Right.
square footage, but you wanted to stay on the square footage because it's easier to calculate that
Right.
from the start.
So one of the bigger changes you're gonna see is we don't currently charge for roof permits unless they're replacing the sheathing. And I had quite a few instances, especially with all the roofs going on, where a couple of companies in town, I was out on 3 or 4 houses that didn't get done properly. So I'm hoping to have roof permits in general here, not just to generate more income, but just to kind of have a little more oversight into the kind of work that's getting done, make sure the guys that are doing the roofs are licensed, that they're following, the manufacturer specifications on installing the stuff, so.
How
That,
do you police that though, because if you need a new panel on your roof, you don't know that at the time you're taking out the permit.
no, so right now, they wouldn't get a permit at all until they had to replace the sheathing. And a lot of them don't know that either, but if we start requiring a roof permit, just a general roof permit, I think I put 75 down if I recall correctly. But at least that way, it gives me a way to track kind of what's going on. And then there are quite a few code requirements, even to replace your roof, that they would need to meet. So that way we could kind of have a little more control over the quality of work that's getting done. Like I said, I've had some pretty poor roofs, and there wasn't much I could do about it because they didn't have a permit. So I really, could empathize with them a little bit, but.
But isn't that up to the landowner or the resident themselves that's hiring the contractor to check out that contractor?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not, I had my roof done and I had a local contractor and I didn't even think to call you, on it.
A lot of, a lot of people just go with the cheapest one that comes through town. And like when we had that major storm and just about every roof in New London got
Oh, I
redone.
understand that, but isn't that the responsibility of the,
I think we need to
You-
get a
you would hope
permit
so,
for
but,
sure,
like,
for roofs.
Some people just don't
Somebody
know.
needs to be able to watch because
I-
I've seen an awful lot of stuff.
Well, and the reputable companies expect to have to pay a permit because I need a new roof. And all those that I've had come in all spoke to me about what they would include, and they all said permits and,
Yeah,
so-
and really, we were getting some permits, but I'm guessing there was probably 300-400 roofs. I talked to Building Supply down there and I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said this is the highest he's ever had since he's been in business, so. And
Well,
it
it was
said
a
most of it was
catastrophic
from roofing.
storm.
But
that
there's
went
these
through.
storm chasers that go around,
Oh, yeah.
so they'll go to a
Yeah.
community where there's a tornado
Right.
or hail damage or something. So I had people here from Illinois, Indiana, and to kind of
Iowa.
chase them down, like I told the owners, I think some pretty poor work done.
That
And,
permit is gonna protect the homeowner. Say
Yeah.
somebody doesn't know, one of the first things you'd want to know, do you have insurance? If you got this guy up on your roof and he falls down, who's gonna get
You
sued?
can
You
sue
are.
your homeowner.
So having to get a permit
Yeah.
Mhm.
would protect people that don't know some of the scrupulous people that are running around. So I think a permit is probably a good idea to protect homeowners that don't know that stuff. There's a lot of people that don't know that.
Yeah.
They're just gonna go with the cheapest guy they can get. Like Davis said, you're gonna go with the cheapest guy. He might not necessarily be the best guy.
Oh, because you can take the extra insurance money and run.
some insurance companies were kind of giving me some grief, to meet code, like on some that had some cedar shakes. They didn't want to have to redeck the roof, but the code says you have to. So there was some of that back and forth too, but
I think. the
anyway,
permit-
so
I
we're not
just
going to
question
spend a
of-
lot of time on this tonight. Kind of maybe, I hate to say homework assignment, but if
Yeah.
people kind of look through these and just, if you have something in there, you're like, I don't think that's right, too low, too high or something, or maybe they don't think we, because I've had a gentleman, one of our local contractors here that cannot believe we want to charge for putting water heater permits. And so if you've got some animus towards something or away from something, just kind of give some notes. So when we meet next month, we can kind of get an idea on if we're moving in the right direction. So we don't spend a ton of time if that's not the way the planning commission wants to move. So we'll be looking for a recommendation to give this to council to amend our zoning and building department.
You're thinking about bringing this up then today, on next month's agenda?
Yeah, I want to be able to kind of go over if folks have comments to kind of discuss this a little bit and maybe move toward taking some action on possibly adopting this as an appendix to our zoning ordinance.
This was a lot of stuff. So we wanted to give the commission enough time to absorb it for a month and kind of think about it. And I mean, this is, like David said, I mean, the building inspection department, zoning department should be a little bit more self-funded. And perfect case in point, where we were on Tuesday night with the state legislation, what were they saying? They were saying, okay, cities, you need to do everything you can too. Looking at your fees, looking at your stuff. So this falls right in line what we were talking about with the state legislators, on Tuesday about being diversified in our revenue sources and,
We don't
should
want
maybe
to,
do
we don't
our-
want to
our
gouge,
Homework, have some other people look at this too
right?
and get their opinions, on what they think of some of our schedules. Like the rest of the aldermen, we only got a few of them here now.
Yeah.
But I mean, so that we get a little more input from everybody, just instead of just a few of us here on these fees.
And we'll have a public comments portion of that at some point, if this moves toward adoption, but
You're looking at probably a couple of months before we're going to get to the point where we're going to be bringing it to council for approval.
yeah.
well, you're probably going to want this implemented by the first of the year. So
Yeah, October, November, yeah.
I see, yeah,
And I don't want to
November.
burden our contractors here. We want them to stay in business, but on the other hand, we've got to find a way to, create, bring in some revenue to, so we can cover some of our expenses. So
and with that said, this isn't,
this is kind of middle of the
Middle of
road.
the
I mean,
road.
there's definitely some places that are, a lot higher and there's some that are lower too, but we want to kind of be in the middle of the pack, make it conducive to our contractors come in to be able to do business here.
I have a question about on these permits. What's the turnaround time for having them granted?
A permit issued?
Yeah.
A lot of times it's the same day. Yeah, it very seldom does it take more than a couple of days. I get them in and get them right out. So sometimes we have a little plan review that we have to do and I'll defer some of that to Kunkel. But for the most part, a lot of times they'll walk out of the office with a permit in their hand. And then other times it's only a day or two at tops. So.
Just want to know when my new door arrives, what I get.
Anybody got anything else on it? Look for discuss for upcoming agenda items, Dave? If you want.
Just, obviously, we're gonna finish up with Cedar Corp. We're still working on some ordinance changes. I think we ought to put some effort into pursuing redoing our zoning ordinance, which would mean would send out some RFPs to Cedar Corp and some other companies to give us some ideas on what it will cost. We're thinking somewhere in the ballpark of 25,000 to have them come in and read, kind of like they did with our plan here, comprehensive plan, to have them come in and help design our zoning ordinance, because it's a mess. So I think that's probably the next big item that we need to do. So the software is up and running, seems to be working very well. I'm looking forward to getting a lot of data in there, and at some point, you, hopefully folks will be able to access it on the different commissions, so.
I think that would be a good idea. We don't get one of these out to all the aldermen. You think the fee schedule?
It was in the packet.
Oh, it is in the pack.
Yeah, it's on the agenda.
Yeah.
So, yep. And then Bob, I'll just remind everybody, I sent this email to the plan commission, the council. There's a Fox Cities Housing Forum. I mean, just what Eric was talking about. The Fox Cities did a big study and they're going to be doing a presentation on this. So any local planners, plan commission, I'm planning on going.
I'm planning on going as well.
Yep. But as an elected official or appointed, let us know if you're going, because if we have too many, if we have a quorum goal, we have to post it. So right now, I'm just assuming Dave and I are gonna go. If anybody else wants to go, let us know. So if we have a quorum, we'll have to let people know that to post it.
You drive the bus?
If we got enough, I can. I've got experience.
If anybody wants to, they can always meet me at the office or call me, and I'd be glad to go over any questions that they have about the fee schedule.
Our next meeting, October 27th. Would you have any problems with that one?
Is it the 27th? I thought it was, we changed it to the 26th. I have it, the 26th.
That I
Did
don't
we change
recall.
it? Or not?
I'm sorry if I missed that, but I don't recall moving it, but
That's the one where you said it was his wedding anniversary or something?
Yeah, there was a wedding
I thought
anniversary
that's that
thing.
way.
That was this month, I
That is
think.
once? Okay.
For some reason, I had the 27th crossed out and I have the 26th written.
Maybe that
down.
was his anniversary, because was this because Swiderski was gonna need the development agreement? The reason we moved this one?
This originally,
And then maybe it was his anniversary.
think
on the
you're right.
27th.
Yeah, the
In
27th.
October.
Yeah,
Okay.
So we're gonna go to the 26th then?
I'm open to the 26th. I don't know about anybody else.
Yeah.
oh, I have it in my calendar for the 26th as well. You're right.
Good catch. All right.
And what is it, a Wednesday?
Correct.
Yeah.
Good catch.
That's all I have.
Everybody's in agreement on that, then we're on Wednesday, the 26th. Look for a motion to adjourn.
Also move.
I'll second it.
Adjourn, all in favor?
Aye.
Hi.